Um, The first order of business on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from 2/24/2020. Everybody get a chance to read those? I know we talked about these last time. Josh was explaining before we got on that there were a few small changes. And he needed those approved before he could post April 13th. So any questions about those minutes?
It's Julie. I have a question. I thought we voted on that and I abstained because I wasn't there. Did we not vote on that at the last meeting?
Josh just didn't get the vote down. It might have been when he got disconnected. So we'll vote it again.
We'll vote again. Okay. And I have another question. Before we vote on that, do we have to offer public comment? I'm not sure if there's anyone in the public, but from the agenda standpoint, public comment came before the minutes. So I didn't know whether we needed to come back to that or offer that or.
I usually do that at the end, but I don't see anybody from
Okay.
public on, so.
All right, as long as we
Oh,
don't.
I do.
Cool.
I saw Mike Dolan and Lillian Holberg. Are they still on? Yeah.
I mean, as long as we call for it sometime during the meeting, I just wanted to point out that that it was there. That's all.
No problem.
Okay.
So this was the April 13th and it was a teleconference, right? And so,
2/24. 2/24, Kathy, not April 13th.
I can just chime in real quick. So I was having the connection issues last meeting and I didn't get the vote for the 2/24. And because I didn't have the vote for the 2/24, the April 13th minutes can't be completed because I don't have that vote. So I haven't put those on the agenda just yet. I know you had mentioned, Kathy, that there were some changes that you wanted made to the 13th.
yes, yeah.
If
Sorry.
you just want to email those to me, and then when we do the next meeting, I'll have the 13th on the agenda. We could just do the amendments that you had proposed and get the vote in.
Yeah, so you understood my change for that one, right?
Yeah, for the 13th.
Yeah, the members present, the members present and not present didn't look right?
Yeah, and we'll just, for the next meeting that has the 13th on the agenda, if you don't mind just bringing that up, that way we can get it amended for that.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so for February 24th, does anybody have any concerns or changes for the minutes on February 24th? Josh, you want to take a roll? Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. This is Kathy.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Sorry, who's going to second?
Julie.
Yeah.
And then Josh, you'll do the roll call?
Yep. I'll start with you, Eric.
Aye.
Kathy.
Yes.
Susie.
Yes.
Julie.
Yes.
Bill. Bill is muted. On
Bill, you're on mute.
Bill.
Yes.
All right. I'll set there. Thank you.
Okay. The next order of business is ordinance DFY 2008, which is the general ordinance to rescind the ordinance of D 2012-004, which was the fiduciary oversight of the budget and the ambulance receipt fund. I know that in the past we talked about this and held it for tonight so that we could recommend we replace it with something additional. I know that Bill had worked with myself and Nate on pulling something together. And Josh, you sent that out. Just keep me honest here. When did you send that out? Today?
Sorry, which document?
The ambulance ordinance. I believe it was today.
So I have a question before we talk about this. So was this already voted on by the Town Council Budget and Finance Committee?
Was what voted on?
The ordinance?
To
You,
rescind?
you talking about the original?
No, I'm talking about this FY 2008 because it comes to us and the Town Council Budget and Finance Committee, right? And so my
Right,
question
but
is,
I don't
have
know if
they
they
already voted on it?
Oh, no. Not that I'm aware of. Michael? Michael, the council hasn't voted on that ordinance, have they?
I don't believe so.
No, I
The
think-
council definitely has not.
Yeah.
I don't believe Budget and Finance has yet either.
Right. That's what I thought.
And Eric, the only thing I've sent out today was the Town of Bridgewater assessment letter.
Okay, so it must have been.
No, he
yes.
sent it out yesterday.
Yes.
I sent it to Josh on Sunday. He sent it out yesterday morning. two
Does everybody
documents.
have, yeah, does everybody have those two documents?
Yes.
Josh, do you want to just pull them up so we can kind of talk through them?
Yes, I can pull them up and share them.
Thank you. The first document, just so that everybody understands, was the original 2012 order. So I don't know that we need to pull that one up, Josh, as much as the changes that that we took a look at and we can talk through.
Right. Trying to get everything here.
Can someone talk to why we are not just rescinding as the order came through as?
Yeah, it'd be helpful if Josh could bring up the documents. And we can talk through it.
Yep. Did we want to start with what Bill sent?
Yes?
Yes, please.
We can start with the original ordinance from 2012, if you want.
Was that 2012-04? Is that the one you're referring to, Bill?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm on the right place. Yay. So I got it today about 3 o'clock, I think, 3:09.
Josh, you gonna be able to bring that up?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it to share here.
So while we're waiting for that, I have a question for Tony. Tony, so
Yes, sir.
I hopefully you get a chance to read through that. So one of the concepts of the breakout of the fund is that a portion that you figure out each year goes toward operations, but a portion stays within the fund to accumulate for things like leases and purchases and whatnot.
That's
Do
correct.
you have a sense of what that percentage breakout is between the two components?
Sure. In FY19, let me just do this quick. The operational percentage was 92, 93. Yeah, okay, 92. And the lease was obviously the 8%. In 20, I got 90% as the operational of the estimated revenue, and 10% would have been And I project in next year, it's about the same as FY20, 90%. And that doesn't take into account the existing fund balance. That's just basing it on the revenue estimates for 20 and 21. Does that answer your question?
It does partially. So are we still accumulating anything into the fund balance?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, then,
Revenue
so
is
where's
our
that?
distribution
Right. So where's that money coming from, though?
because we don't allocate all of it. It sits there.
Right. So that's the piece I'm looking for is how much is allocated toward the fund balance and how much is used.
I
What
thought you
percentage
said
breakout
what's the
is that?
allocation? Okay, so
Yeah. Right.
all right, so I gave everyone a fund balance projection, but here's the thing. So we are approximately adding to fund balance each. So for FY20, I anticipate that we will appropriate 83% and 17% will go to fund balance.
Okay.
So if
That's
you
a
look
good
to the
number.
forecast I gave you, based on our spending projections and our increases to what we're allocating, we're going to continue to grow a substantial fund balance. So what I'm saying
Okay.
is not only are you building fund balance, you're using cash in the bank and you're using no projections. If we had that in our other revenue streams, we'd be having a different conversation tonight about revenue.
Did you send us that recently?
I've sent it a number of times. I will send you a revised one once we close April, or I can update March's. But yes, it's called a dashboard. I know Melissa forwarded that. Josh, maybe you can check the doc you've already received in the past in the shared file. I don't know, but I know we have sent this to you. I'm certain of it.
Okay. All right. So that's good. So can we flip pages to the ambulance receipt, the original?
That's
Is
it.
that the original? No, there was the, oh, okay, that's good. So let's walk through this for a second. So Tony had outlined that the ambulance receipts fall under Chapter 40, Section 5F. So the text is here. And if you scroll down, Josh, the problem with the website is that I can't find the original order. I'm sure Ann could. And I can't find it listed on any of the town documents currently. So it's a little bit hidden, but I found the agenda where we talked about it. And I think this is in context. So if you scroll down a little bit more, okay, that's good. So a little bit of background first. So Tim thought that I was the creator of this, which no, it was Mike Bertolini and Mike Demos at the time. So the intention was that, as Tony just said, that there's a large revenue source coming from the ambulance, and it's treated as a profit center. So as we pull in revenue, part of that revenue, and it looks like 83% this year, last year, is being used to fund the operations side. So it funds the wages and benefits of the crew, and it funds the capital items for the leases and that sort of thing. And then a portion of that goes back into the reserve, and the reserve continues to build. And out of the reserve, we might end up sometime buying another ladder truck, for example, which run a couple $1 million and some other equipment out of there. So when written originally, the intention was to put a break point on the availability of the dollars, because I think prior to that, the selectmen's budget had probably taken a larger portion of the ambulance receipts and used it for operations or covering other costs.
If I can, just to clarify
Yep.
something, because this is important, they actually used estimated receipts.
Sure.
They were estimating, they didn't even have the money in the bank. They were estimating future receipts.
Right.
Okay.
So the cap was put on to be $1 million, and in those days it was maybe $1.5 million, maybe $1.25 million, something like that, maybe less. But it did allow the town council to exceed that when we came to the budget time, and so that's why I've highlighted those two portions. So the stuff above it, in the paragraphs above the ordered, was really just a notation. Doesn't really have anything to do with the order itself. But where I came into place was originally this order, before we reworked it, said a 9/10 vote of the entire council, which means that at budget time, you would need effectively the entire council to vote to exceed the $1 million limit on any given year. So that was a lot of risk. So I was able to negotiate down to 2/3, although we kept the entire council. That paragraph, I think, really should go because we have the checks and balances in with the voting during the budget process. And it would simplify the process and reduce risk if we could get rid of it. But the gatekeeping on the dollars and the protection of the reserve fund, I think, is still important. So, Josh, if you scroll down a little bit. And the note and the explanation are part of the original order. It's not my text. It's what came off the item off the agenda. But at the proposed changes, this is what Eric, Nate, and I talked about Sunday morning. So rather than rescinding the order, we recommend to amend the older ordinance. So it keeps the protection onto the reserve account. Strike that 2/3 vote limit because then the item's treated like any other budget, and replace the $1 million limit with shall not exceed. And I picked 60% because it sounded fair, but as we see, it can go higher. Shall not exceed 60% of the forecasted ambulance receipts in any given fiscal year. So if we bump that up to like 85%, then we put a protection into making sure that there's enough reserve going into that fund to continue to grow. Now, Tony, this is where we're looking for your recommendation. Should that be higher? Should it be 90%? Should it be a little bit lower? So the intention is to continue the practice of building that reserve so that the money's there for purchase, but still enabling the process to kind of hold the limit on how much to spend out of the ambulance receipts for the operational side.
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents. I don't think this order is required at all, and I think it should be rescinded because the mechanisms are in place by the general law. And when the vote is taken in May or April, whenever the vote's taken, you cannot make an appropriation that's greater than the actual fund balance, the cash in the bank. So you are at, if you are at 100% in April, then you have May, June, and half of April's collections. So I'm less concerned about forecasting here. However, if you were to ask me, and that's the way you wanted to proceed, then I would say somewhere between 85 and 90%. Again, prior to any sort of appropriation, you could put a requirement that a fund balance analysis would need to be provided and revenue estimates would need to be provided to the Finance Committee, the Budget and Finance Committee, prior to voting on any appropriation out of there. I'd be more inclined to putting that restriction on it so that the financial reporting and the compliance to the law are proven and presented to the financial decision makers or recommenders, if you would. That's my 2 cents. However you go, we just said that, about 83% for this year. Next year, I know they're gonna have another lease payment of about another 60 because we're gonna have 3 leases going on at one time. So that number for lease payments this year could go up by another additional $67,000. So it can move upwards and downwards. So if you wanted to, and the other component, I guess, no, sticking with that thought, we would just need to make sure there's enough room in that calculation. The other thing I would want you to consider is you realize what I am also holding firm on is this piece of this perspective. So ever since we went off of funding the firefighters from the SAFER grant to funding them out of the operational revenues, e.g. the general fund revenue and or ambulance, we've maintained a 68.5% of their budget is funded from the general fund revenue streams, and 31.5% is funded from the ambulance. Now we know, Michael and I talk about this every year during the revenue review, that if that number starts to erode, if that 31.5% can't be funded from the ambulance, then we have a structural revenue issue with the funding of the whole fire operation. So we're looking at it from that perspective as well. Hearing all that, I think if you wanted to put this in place, it would be somewhere between 85 and 87%. That probably would work, and then you would require some vote if it was over that. But that's my 2 cents on that.
All right, so what does everyone else think?
So I think we should rescind it. I think we should vote to rescind it as it stood.
But Tony, just so that I understand, quick question for you. You're saying, right, that the way it sits today is you can't budget over the actual receipts, and you still have to collect 2.5 months while the number's set. Am I thinking about that the right way? So you're always going to over deliver.
Yeah, because here's the thing, like this year we're using for transferring in, let's say we're using 1,857,000. Well, we have 1 million. We have $2,364,000 in cash in the bank. All
But
the
if somebody wanted to get aggressive, you could raise that to $2 million without any
I would
control
never.
at all.
I would strongly recommend it against it. That's upsetting your whole process. You have to really think long and hard.
No, I get that. But
Someone could.
not that I want you to go anywhere, because I think you're great, but
No.
you know, this other control has been in place for almost 10 years.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking in terms of multi-year controls and discussions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you're right. This year we're having a revenue problem. Someone could say, well, let's use another $600,000 out of the ambulance fund. I would fight you tooth and nail on that. Now, would someone else? I don't know. So I understand why you want to put a mechanism in place, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. There's maybe other ways to put a mechanism in that you can't, that we could talk about. But again, if you're going based on 85 of projected, and let's say 85 projected doesn't take into account that let's say I didn't have 2.3 million in the bank. What if I had only $1.5 million? That languaging wouldn't preclude us from making a vote to transfer 83% of the estimated revenues if I thought I could. Again, this is where they fell down before. Estimating receipts out of the ambulance fund is like estimating a revenue in the general fund. Yet, we don't want to use this revenue in that way. So I guess I could break that rule. I could be the new guy that comes in and says, okay, my estimates for next year are 2 million. Then you guys go ahead and appropriate $1.8 million. I only got $1.5 million in the bank. I've done two things. and this is what in the past I think happened. The estimated number wasn't an accurate one. And the law requires that this is a receipts reserved for appropriation. You cannot appropriate more than what's in the fund at the time of the appropriation. And they were voting something that was contrary to that Mass General law.
Mr. Gallagher,
Hi, Tim.
it's 7 o'clock. Do we want to call our meeting to order?
Yeah, we'll call our meeting to order.
But so what do we do with our meeting that was in play here?
I don't know. What time did your meeting start?
6:30.
Okay, so the joint meeting started at 7, starts at 7. So why don't you just finish your meeting and then we'll wait.
Okay.
Tim, we'll just hold off until they're done. Yeah.
Okay.
Just,
So
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm not sure who's here. Eric, any thoughts on this? Kathy? I know you had said rescind it, but anyone else?
So Bill, I know, you know, you and I talked about it, and the idea of rescinding it just without any guidelines whatsoever felt like you could get very, very aggressive year after year after year and get it, you know, and we were trying to avoid that. I think Tony kind of gave me a little bit more information than I was, or I guess I'm thinking about it a little bit differently than I was prior to this conversation, in the fact that you can only appropriate per law what's already in the elected balance. So not having the ability to overestimate it makes me feel a lot better about the controls we already have. That's my 2 cents.
You guys gonna have to do it without me.
Well, of course, even with a change in the control, it still allows the council as a majority to approve that. So, so this would continue to work. You know how the budget resolution puts together the idea that we have so much revenue to use, and this is one portion of that. So I suppose it could go into that language too. So as long as it's somewhere in the guidance, either the budget resolution or someplace else, then that's probably fine. I think we've learned that it's 31.5, you know, from the receipts used for the budget. And Tony, you're pretty much keeping to that
Yes,
percentage
yes.
year after year.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as that's the practice, that sounds fine.
And that could be documented in a policy that can get adopted.
Yeah.
I mean, we can draft something up that of the mechanism that is, you know, maybe a financial reporting to the subcommittees around certifying the funds that are available for appropriation at time of the budget. Something, again, whatever, but I don't know that it's an order is necessary going forward.
If we rescinded, it's Julie, if we rescinded it and we did find that it wasn't working, is there a way to bring it back? How, or not?
Well, a new mechanism would have to be introduced. That's all.
Correct.
So I think the question is, are we good with rescinding it for this year, knowing that we'll recommend something down the road in order to continue the process? I mean, I have my thoughts. I'm sure everybody else has theirs.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with rescinding it as long as we continue working on the financial policy. I think Tony has some good ideas on that.
Yep, I agree.
That sounds reasonable.
So do I have a motion to rescind the ambulance order from 2012?
It's Kathy, motion to rescind.
Do I have a second?
Second, Julie.
Josh, you want to do the roll call?
Hey, Josh, before you do, Nate's here. I've been here.
Yep, I was just about to ask. Let me just rename you real quick. Just a moment. And did we have anybody else enter? Let's just double check. Okay. All right. Yep. I'll start the roll call vote. Eric,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Susie.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, knowing that there's another meeting that we want to get started, I will just open it up to any public comment before I call, or I guess I don't have to call it to, do I have to call it to adjourn? Do I have to adjourn this meeting or not? I think we can stay in session if we're going to have a joint meeting, so I'll open it for public comment and we'll start the joint meeting. Is there any public comment? Great. Dennis and Tim, thank you for your patience.
Yeah. It's always Bill's fault.
At least I get credit somewhere, okay?
So I'll call our Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order at 7:06. I think Sean and Tim are here, right? Tim's here.
Sean's on. I'm in my youngest son's room because everyone else is scattered all over the house, so I'm not going to let you see his ridiculous mess.
So he's in the dark. There's no lights in there. So do you want to make a motion to approve our minutes from April 14th?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Motion and second. Tim, aye.
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Dennis, yes, 3-0. Do you want to put delay order FY 19057?
So moved.
Second.
Tim?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Dennis, yes, so we'll move that really discussion items. We have, the purpose of this joint meeting is to begin the joint discussion of the FY 20 and 21 budget. I'm sure Tony has already gone over some critical areas with you guys. He went over some things with us the last meeting. So I'll just turn it over to Tony we'll start with the FY 20 scenario as to where we are last 2 months of 20 and then go into 21.
Okay, that's your agenda, right? I had the 21 stuff. Let me just share something with myself from one system to another, and we'll take a peek at that. So in general, we are working, and I say that the collective is both the leadership team, Jen and Michael and myself and Kimberly, to really come up with different ways of monitoring, measuring, and communicating where we are. I'm very encouraged to say that we are posting all cash through each Sunday night. The entire week's cash posting is getting done sometime during Monday. So every Monday we have a look at where our collections are, okay? We'll give a nice full report once April 30th hits. So that's my segue into my document. 1 sec. Here it is, just showed up. All right. So am I a joint presenter here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I stopped sharing, so you should be able to share
Okay.
more.
I got a number of files open. So I assume now that you guys can see this.
Yes.
Okay. So we started on May 12th when we started to make our changes to where we were working, and we all knew that we were going to be bumping up against, excuse me while I try to get this to display. A little bit better. Okay. Can you read that legible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So what we first started to think about was cash flow. Okay. So we looked at it as, all right, we want to make sure that we don't have a cash flow issue. We knew we weren't going to have a revenue issue on the local receipts and on the state aid, because the state aid, everything that we've been told and everything we're using in our end of year calculations says we're going to get our final distribution from the state as planned, right? No 9C cuts for those who have been around long enough to know what that means, which is just mid-year revenue cuts from the state. The other thing, because we have been continue to be prudent in our local receipts, we knew that we were very, very close to meeting our local receipts numbers mid-March. All right, so that gave us comfort that we felt at the first look at our cash flow that we were going to be able to meet that flow of revenue, which would, positively impact our cash. What we weren't sure of, and we still are a little bit unclear on, is whether or not our receipts for property tax will be negatively impacted by the moving of the due date and the comfort level of our taxpayer to really let go of cash, because cash is king. When someone has their taxes paid through a escrow mortgage company, well, that's going to get paid. So we identified the majority of the revenue we knew we would get, or pretty certain, and that's why I'm going to start to take you through this document and speak to what degree of certainty we had. So the top part of it, our ending cash balance or beginning April cash balance, starting in March, was $3,966,450.
Tony, can I interrupt and just take a step back for 1 second?
Sure.
Can you explain why looking at this cash is very important to you? Because if we're going to be short, couldn't we just issue revenue anticipation notes?
Yeah. So yes, revenue, let me go to the big picture again. So why is cash important? Cash is important because you got to pay your bills. Now, what Tim just alluded to is you can go out and borrow in anticipation of tax revenue. The thing is with that is it gets you through June 30th. All right. But then by June 30th, you have to pay back that note. So your cash position at the end of the fiscal year is wherever it lands. So you have to pay back that note prior to the end of the fiscal year. So your balance sheet, your books could be in a negative cash position. Can you borrow
And that then negatively impacts free cash.
It negatively impacts that, and it also, again, it just says you are eroding your revenue stream faster than what has ever really occurred in my tenure with the town of Bridgewater, and even through the economic downturn of 2008, 9, 10. Okay, so I wanted to measure and see whether or not we're going to meet our cash obligation. To me, that was like a signpost. If we could get that done, then I say, okay, we're kind of holding off what we may anticipate is going to happen in 21. And it gave me a level of comfort as to how much we understood our revenue stream, how much we were going to then be able to learn from the taxpayers who don't pay, because this is a big learning curve for us. And I don't mean to go off target here, but it's more for me, the learning that needs to take place over the next few months, and the cash flow is just a barometer to that. So what do I mean by that?
Well, and just because I keep going back to this, Tony, and
Yeah.
you know, forgive me for doing this.
That's okay.
The money that someone owes on their real estate tax, if they do not pay it, if they don't physically send money to us and send cash to us somehow,
Yep.
that's still an account receivable to us, and we're going to get that money no matter what at some point in time down the road. Might be 15, 20 years, you never know. But we have an asset on the book saying someone owes us this money, and we can certainly use that for other financial purposes. But you know, as far as writing checks for ourselves and paying our bills, it's very important we have cash flow. And that's kind of the difference I was getting at, was that we want to make sure we can pay everybody, and we don't have to go into these revenue anticipation notes. We don't have to, you know, essentially erode what would be our free cash position that's going to be certified in the fall, even though they are, in fact, assets we have if they're not paid, right?
Yes.
That's what I was trying to drive at. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, but clearly this isn't like the private sector. You don't record that as revenue that hits your fund balance or bottom line, or your ability to calculate what your free cash is. It doesn't work that way in this type of business. So that's why, to me, cash and fund balance are very, very closely tied. Okay. So sometimes I will interchange those, but let's just say, we're really looking at what are the revenues and what are the expenditures, because that's going to affect both your fund balance and or your cash position. I will kind of highlight something Tim said. 2 years ago, we had a windfall of tax title revenue, which is that which gets leaned because you don't collect it. And that a lot of that tax title came about as of 2008, 2009, 2010. And all the penalties and interest. So we, in essence, had spent the money that we had voted at an annual town meeting or a council meeting, because we appropriate to 100% of the levy, whether we collect 100% or not, and then we move forward. But to Tim's point, we may collect it 15 years from now. So it is a barometer to how people are paying and what might end up happening with the receivables that end up going to tax title, which means you're not going to collect them for years. And that's a concern, because that impacts bottom line and it impacts your cash. So
and Tony, just one other question. I don't know if you're going to get into it eventually or not, but how our cash flows to the regional school district and when we pay them money versus the, you know, like a 1/12 per month. And how that affects cash. Thank you.
Yep. And to that, I will then say, when it crosses over to the next fiscal year, we pay 100% of our retirement assessment so that we can get a significant discount on that. And we pay 1/12 of our regional school district assessments. We pay a lot of our premiums for our liability insurance. We have a full month's worth of premium for our health care. We have assessments from 3 other regional vocational schools. They want their assessment. So in the month of July, cash is flying out the door. So our ending cash position is important. And when we do borrow money, we have to, in fact, pay interest on it. So in the business that we're in, cash is king. And I think that applies to most homeowners too. Cash is king. So now I'll move on. So under the property tax, we're moderately sure that we're going to collect 97% of our revenue. Why are we not sure? Typically, we collect 99% of it because we don't know what the changing of the due dates will have, and we do not know the remaining payers that need to make payments are not going to be coming through the mortgage companies. They're going to come from the direct taxpayer. So we don't know whether they lost their job. We don't know whether or not they're having difficulty paying their mortgage, paying their utility bills. We don't know. So it's the big unknown. I would like to think we're going to get closer to that 99% right now. Why would I think that? So again, this is a moderate degree of certainty, and the reason is that all the monies for the CARE Act came out. So for a household of 4, there could have been upwards to 24, and another 1,000 could be $3,400. Plus, if they were unemployed, they're going to get their standard unemployment plus an additional 600. So we know right now there is a shoring up of the homeowners' sources of income, even if they have been laid off. So that's good for now. So that's why I say this is moderate. I'm being conservative, I think, here when I say moderate. So then you look to the right of that, we've collected as of 4/26/20 this year, 90.1% of our personal property. Last year, we had collected 93.8%. This year through 4/26 on the real estate, we've collected 87.9, and last year it was 87. So there's, and most of the dollars are coming through your real estate. Only about $1.3 million comes through your personal property tax. But that gives us an indicator. So we're watching that, and we want to see whether or not the receivable collections start to slow. So in the next, we know there's going to be some degree of slow pay because we moved the due date from 5 to 6/1. So we're going to be able to compare what has on our collections over the next days. Make sense?
Yeah, Tony, you should have a good handle on that by the end of May, wouldn't you say? Because mine has already been paid.
Yes, we got like $7 million in the last week from mortgage companies.
Right.
I'm sorry, 5.8.
Right. So you should.
Thank you, Dennis, by the way.
Yeah, I paid mine too.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
So on the cherry sheet is obviously it's a high number because we have not heard of any sort of cuts.
But Tony, isn't there also a program that even though someone is getting this stimulus money, that they can ask their mortgage company to give them a couple of months of, let me see where it goes here in their family?
Yeah.
But that may not affect the escrow amount. They still have to pay the escrow amount, but they don't have to pay the principal. Or is that the whole thing? Because I know some people that are asking their mortgage companies, look, I'm out of work. I am getting unemployment, but I need some help for a couple of months. Can you freeze my mortgage payments for a couple of months? Usually come through an escrow.
I'm going to do a little bit more research because I did watch the governor today and I did do some additional reading, and I think it's even more, I think it's even more than a couple months. The tricky part that I'm hearing is when the individuals are calling the mortgage companies, there doesn't seem to be clarity on whether this is a complete deferral of X number of months and it will be put at the end of the loan, or will it be a balloon due in 3 months? Will it be compounding of interest on interest? So I think as a municipality, if we can get clarity and put that onto our website so that our residents know, then that they could use that as another alternative to deal with their financial situations. We would hope with that information, they would see that they could pay their real estate.
Yeah, but you'll have you'll know by the end of May we should be close to that 97% if people are paying.
I agree, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm hoping that June becomes gravy. So I'm hoping we hit the 97 by end of May. And then I know then we can with certainty go into July of next year with X dollars of cash in the bank. So
That's
yes.
important. That's important, yeah.
Yes. So on the local receipt side, our meeting the budget is high. Why? Because we've met the budget. We met our local receipts budget as of 4/26. And we have a surplus. So that's going to help us. So that potential, that surplus is going to help us with any, will offset any slow collections on the property tax side.
Tony, where does this surplus come from?
It will come from your normal buckets. It will come from your licenses and permits. We happen to be collecting more on the marijuana. And we are collecting, we anticipate collecting more on our motor vehicle excise.
I'd like to at some point get a breakdown between what you believe is one-time versus recurring revenue in that, because, you know, if we're getting more permits just because it's, you know, people are looking to do projects, I don't know if that's recurring or not. If motor vehicle excise, you know, that's always dicey to predict. So I'd just like to see a greater breakdown of it so we can think about going into the next fiscal year, you know, what can we anticipate sustaining versus what can we not anticipate sustaining?
Absolutely. And that's the plan. I bring you to that, close to that in today's call. But I will tell you this, the surplus that we're showing of 676 as of right now, 621,000 from licenses and permits, and 284,000 of that is one time.
Which I believe we've always thought should go toward capital type expenditures or capital funds or long-term debt obligations like OPEB, et cetera, rather than being plowed back into the budget, right?
And that's exactly what we have done with our free cash allocation each year. So, you know, if we are to have some free cash this year, it would be the same process that we would use. And yes, that would be a major factor in why we would have it.
Tony, do local receipts include like the lodging and meals tax revenue?
I'm going to get to the four major categories in a second.
Okay.
Well, no, that's okay, but I'll highlight them. It's your motor vehicle. It's your meals and room tax. It's your licenses and permits, mostly driven by your building type permits. And then penalties and interest is something I'm going to have to watch real closely, because it can be a windfall like we saw last year. One of the reasons we had free cash, they said we're getting that penalties and interest on some old receivables, and they're going to flush through, and it's going to make our free cash look good. But once people get caught up, then in fact, that number starts to drop in good economic times. On the other hand, in bad economic times, people will slow pay, and that will hurt your cash flow initially. Once you finally get to collect on that, if you can maintain a balanced budget and you can maintain a sustained operation, then you get the windfall like we did in FY19's free cash and FY18's free cash. We were like 3.6 and $2.6 million in free cash. Those are some of the drivers that I've alluded to along the way. So now we can see how they work in reverse, because there can be a delay in the penalties and interest. So those are your major items. Now we go back on interest income. We were getting nothing a while back, and over the last year, the interest rates had started to climb up, and so we started to achieve much higher returns on those. And we also looked at our investing. So those would be the major lines that will be driven by economic conditions. Some drive it, good economic conditions drive those numbers up, and in some cases, drive the number down in the penalty and interest category. And then in bad economic situations, some of the numbers go down and some of the other numbers will go slightly up. But those are the major categories. Does that answer it?
Tony, a question if I could.
Mhm.
So are you tracking currently our food tax and hotel tax
Absolutely.
income and how it's working?
Yeah.
With the
The good thing with that for the group and for you, Bill, is the cutoff actually was right in line with when the Corona whole debacle hit. What I mean by that is when we got our distribution in March for the quarterly distribution for meals and for room tax, that was for December, January, and February. So when we get our June distribution, that will be for March, April, and May. So what we talked about today in our finance group meeting is we will really get an idea, because we can't parse out where that revenue comes from, meaning how much does your major, let's say you have 4 major restaurants in town, meaning they're sit-in, full bars, you know, you get Barrett's, you get the 99, and maybe you have a couple others like that, right? So what we're going to find out right away is what impact is not being able to sit inside of a restaurant going to do to your meals tax.
Tony, we have 23 pizza places. Don't say whatever else.
That's correct. And what we may find is
Donuts.
that I'm being very conservative in that, and that a large portion of that revenue comes from just what you said. And if that's the case, then that's good, because during economic downturn, people will buy more pizza and not go to the restaurant. So we will be able to sustain that number more than maybe a town that's filled with high-end restaurants, as an example. All right. So we're gonna, when I started this conversation and said we're gonna learn a lot about our revenues in good economic times, we are. So in that case, we're tracking that. We're tracking, as you can see, we're down to the local receipts, and we're tracking our commitments. And Bill's seen, and some of the finance committee has seen all the analytical work we've done on average age of vehicles, the number of vehicles registered in the town, what percent of the vehicles that are leased, what are not leased, so forth and so on. That's all good for big picture stuff, but we're talking about cash flow and meeting our revenue projections. So what does that mean? How are we collecting the commitments that we send out? And not by comparing this year to last year, it's the collection days. So we're measuring now for each commitment based on collection days and doing a comparative to commitment 1 for this year versus a commitment 1 for last year. So in that column where it says NVE-1, we have collected through 41 collection days, 85% of that commitment. Last year, during the same 41 collection days, we collected 85.9. So we're going to watch that, to Dennis's point, we're going to watch that very, very closely as we move in through May, right? We should get a good handle on how things are going. And by the end of June, we'll really know what the consumer confidence is as it relates to, I'm going to pay my motor vehicle tax bill. And the same thing for commitment 2. We've already started to track that. And what you can see, so people pay in advance of their due date. Shocking, huh? So 27.7% of the commitment has been collected 11 days prior to due date for motor vehicle commitment 2. Last year was 38.4. Now that's the commitment that went out later. That went out in, I don't have the commitment date in front of me. Sorry about that. I want to say the end of March, beginning of April. Yeah, that would make sense, because minus 11. So we go out 11 days, and today is the 28th. So we're kind of like the 8th or 7th of May, so that would have gone out April 7th.
So Tony, both those numbers, 27.7 and 38.4 are at minus 11 days.
Correct.
So they're apples to apples, so to speak.
That's why we didn't have to do this when there was plenty of room between estimating and actuals, but now we had to put our metrics at the baseline business level, and that's what businesses do. What are your collection days?
So Tony, what's the difference between MVE 1 and 2?
It's a different billing. So the major billing each year goes out in February. So our February bill, issuance of bills sometime, let's say mid to late February.
Yeah, it's what I probably get for mine, right?
That's right. That was $3 million. Now the MV2 was about $300,000. So what happens is everything that gets billed on the first commitment is through 12/31.
Okay.
All those vehicles registered and all the things that come on, that gets captured. And then each commitment after that captures what's transpiring between. And sometimes they go back. We did see some things that were looking back, and it was seeing January and February registration dates. We didn't understand that, but we're going to talk to the registry about that when the next commitment comes up. What we're also going to do is another layer on this is we're going to actually look at the number of vehicles. So we did all that analytical work by commitment, as I alluded to, and Bill has seen that data, and some of the finance committee members have. Now we're just going to look at from this date to this date in FY20, what were the number of vehicles that were bought? Because we can do that now. And we're going to compare that to last year. So that will be another indicator, because when we see that, we can see that through these commitments. And that will be an indicator how slow the purchasing is. Now we know the number from this year to last year, they came to a screeching halt. But we want to monitor that every commitment. So what's been good is the registry updated their entire software. And so we're going to be able to put commitments out every 2 months. That's not typically how it went. So every 2 months, we're going to be able to do a barometer check as to what's going on. Is there a pickup in the auto sales? Is it still sluggish, or is it in fact still on free fall decline? So that is also going to help us look forward to when's this trend going to start to work upwards. Make sense?
Yep.
Any questions on that?
Nope.
Nope.
On the salaries, wages, expenses. So one of the things, and this is kudos to the finance committee, budget finance committee, and the council, is every time, and the town manager, every time we went to put together a budget, the town manager, myself, and Kimberly and the department heads, and we work collectively on that, we would always say, what is your head count that you need? And we would fund that head count. But we also know that there's always transitionary situations, retirements, people leave, the person that comes in at a lower salary, and that's across the board. So every year, because we do budget full to the head count, anything less than that head count offset by your overtime falls to the bottom line. So for the last couple of years, and particularly fire and police, we have had numbers falling to our bottom line. Again, budgeting like that allows you to, reap the benefits at the end of the fiscal year when you need to, under any circumstance. And I think if you went back to the free cash allocation, you would see that last year was a chunk of change that actually went to the bottom line. So right now, we're showing about $817,000 that we think we're going to have go to the bottom line in salaries, wages, and benefits.
Tony, this is Tim.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this would be one that, kind of is quote unquote a rollover, I guess, for lack of a better term, because we're not going to say we need less police officers all of a sudden.
Correct. That's correct.
Fill all the positions.
And that's why that flows to our free cash, which then gets allocated as a one-time windfall to what? Capital, to sick leave buyback, to
Right, and that was going to be my other question, actually, is the sick leave buyback or any other, retirement payouts? I know we just lost a great police captain to retirement. Does that flow through this line?
No, we make sure of it. That's one of the other practices Michael and I and Kimberly put in place was that's not an operating piece. That's like a liability that's been unfunded. So every time we went to pay out on that, since I've been on board, we've set the internal practice, and ultimately a practice is a policy where we fund that through those one-time revenues. Again, that allows the department head to know what he's going to have for funding. And in the past practice, it would be, someone's retirement. Well, you're going to have to find it in your budget. Well, we negotiate the contract. So if we're negotiating the contract ends up with some sort of a windfall at the end of someone's career, well, shame on us. So we need to be putting that money away in order to fund that. And the number of heads that someone needs to run their operation should be funded. So that's a practice that we use. Correct.
So this is what we talked about at one of our meetings, that we don't factor in any attrition.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Now, have I begun to introduce the idea of budgeting by man hours? Yeah. Another level of budgeting would be straight time man hours and time and a half man hours. The problem is there's always a delay in hiring someone. And you just have to be very careful in not funding the budget based on headcount, because you can get yourself into trouble. I'd rather be conservative and have money go to the bottom line at the end of the fiscal year. And Michael and Kimberly have supported that, and so have you in your budgets that you have voted. So that's really it on the cash flow. So right now, if you can see my cursor at all, I just highlighted something in yellow. That's what I anticipate the ending cash balance to be. That's not bad.
So is that going to be essentially what gets certified as free cash, or what's the difference?
Here we go. I'm going to thank you for entertaining me and bringing me into that. So there is a difference, because I think I showed you there was 2.x. Let's go back to the cash. 2.7. What's really available for your free cash calculation begins as this shows on this screen. We have to start with our fund balance. We make some adjustments for things that were reserved last year. And then we get a new adjusted beginning fund balance. And then we go through what happens in this fiscal year. And we anticipate that our ending undesignated fund balance, and that's the distinction, our undesignated fund balance is 1,000,001. So that's step one of the free cash calculation. Step two is we take the 1,000,001 and we have to put it through the DOR's model. So essentially there's two adjustments to your undesignated fund balance.
So Tony, that was the fastest I've ever seen anyone go through $60 million of plus and minus without explaining it to me.
Yep. You want me to explain it, sir?
That would be great.
Thank you, sir. All right. So let's just say the top of this equation is just a reconciliation from one period to another of your
I'm
fund
just
balance.
looking at 58,379 and 61,254. What are those numbers?
So the revenue closeout, that's our revenue estimate for the year based on the modeling that flows through your cash flow. So at the end of the year, I believe 58,379, 735 will be closed out on the revenue. I believe 61,254 on the expenditure. Now you're going to go, well, wait a second, that's not balanced. Well, that's because the practice of moving all of our free cash out of the general fund flows out of that line. So when
we overspent by $3 million, and it's essentially a kind of a wash that, we moved $3 million out of free cash, and that's where it goes, and then it comes back.
Well, yeah. So your $3 million, the $3,000,008's the beginning fund balance. Well, in essence, what you did was took $2,000,005 out of that,
Right.
and put it to your other funds. Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. So thank you for slowing me down, Tim. I appreciate that. So then you take that number and we move to how does that become free cash? So
Hey, Tony, quick question.
Yeah.
Susie. So that undesignated fund balance, where we started off at what, 3.5 before, and then it comes down to 1.1. Is the 3.5 more typical
well, last year was
of previous years?
Yeah. So what has happened, we've been able to flush through our system old tax title receivables. In FY18, I think we took in around $800,000 in tax title. That's one-time windfall. We had a huge increase in our motor vehicle excise tax billing. It was going up double digits in 2017 and 18. And our actual receipts from the prior year, were 17% below what we got the following year. So you can only, in that case, estimate your motor vehicle excise tax at the highest level is the prior year's actual. So every year we were having 17% of our motor vehicle excise tax flow to our free cash because we're forced to do that with the budgeting model that the DOR requires us to follow. So there's a couple examples. There are other examples where the economic engine was delivering bottom line numbers, which allowed us to build our reserves. And that's why a number of those years, 3.6 and 2.5, those were huge years. And prior to that, I think we were in the millions. So that's why we have $6 million sitting in our stabilization fund. However, now we're going to be on the downside of things, right? So it's going to work in reverse.
Okay, thanks.
You got it. So if we start with a 1,000,001, the allowance for abatements and exemption is money that's put away every year to pay out for someone that submits an abatement, someone that requests an exemption, and ATB cases. I won't get into that, but someone can challenge the assessment and it can go to the appellate tax board and it can be heard. And so you have money put aside if the individual or organization happens to win the judgment, and therefore we have to pay out. Plus we have some unsecured property tax, personal property tax, and unsecured real estate where we have to maintain a certain balance because they are unsecured.
So Tony, on this, is this overlay essentially?
Yeah, in the old world, it's called overlay.
Okay, and so do we have anything in the old world called overlay surplus? Is that in the 827 or no? Is that somewhere else?
Absolutely. In that 827, again, part of what we're doing now on a monthly basis is having our assessor, in this case, analyze what we need based on those three conditions, ATB cases, abatements or exemptions that haven't been processed through, or unsecured real estate or personal property tax receivables. Yes, there is a number there. We haven't come to one that we're comfortable in, but I would say there's a significant number there.
So
I like to call that
overlay, but there's nothing been put to overlay surplus. It's just there's probably more. There's probably less than $827,000 that ultimately we're going to have to pay out, but we don't know what that number is yet.
That is correct. And let me not dance around this. This is our last line of defense, and I really mean that. So in fact, at any point in time, the town manager can request of the assessor's office to release what Tim has referred to as overlay surplus. All it is the money you have in reserves, and in business world, reserved for bad debts, although it's not a bad debt. It's an allowable cost or a unsecured receivable that you can release, i.e. we have more than we need. And in that case, he can ask for that any point in time during the fiscal year. And so if we were to have a revenue shortfall, we find out in October of 21 that, oops, we need to make some adjustments. This is a way to adjust or offset a revenue deficit or a potential revenue deficit. So it's like our I call it our a release valve or our last line of defense mechanism. We have moved that down over the last few years. We're at like 1.2 million, and now we got it down to 827. And I can see that moving downward, not too far, because I want to make sure we have room to maneuver if we need to. That's my recommendation to the town manager anyway.
Yeah,
So then
so
yeah.
I remember when I was on the Board of Assessors and we had assessed certain properties owned by the Bridgewater State University or college, whatever it was at the time, foundation, as still being on the tax rolls that we lost. We ended up losing that case, and that had to get paid out of that fund because we'd assessed it. We said, okay, they need to pay taxes at this level, and then the ATB or whoever said, no, they really don't. And so that was the place that had to go to fund that deficit.
That's exactly right. In fact, we got caught up in the Burger King debacle out there on Route 24, where we still have about $180,000 to $200,000 that we will probably never get paid. They went bankrupt, and we're going through the process of proving that, in fact, there's no way we're going to collect this, and then the DOR would give us permission to release that receivable, write it off, and hit again. So there's a number of things, and we part of that 827 we're sitting on 180 because there was an issue out there on Route 24. So that's another example. So the answer is yes, we have to be conservative because that's the only place we can go if we have to in fact pay out.
Okay, so the worst case scenario then, worst case scenario looks like we'd have 162 in free cash.
Yes, thank you, sir.
That's probably where I'm just trying to move this along because we want to talk about fiscal 21 as well, I believe. So we will get through fiscal 20 without a deficit. It appears that we'll meet our budget. We'll have some free cash, worst case scenario, but not the big numbers we're accustomed to, it appears.
That is correct.
And not to get into any big detail, but how's the golf course looking?
My house.
They would be part of this, wouldn't they? Would that be separate?
Yeah, that's going to be separate, and
Okay.
there's a number that we could spend time next time going over. We've been working, the town manager, myself, and the golf course to come up with a reopening plan, and that's all dependent on the governor. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So if there's no other questions, that's where we hope. That's hope. It's more than hope. That's where I predict right now, conservatively, we'll end up at the end of the fiscal year. If we achieve, like I said, if we achieve back on here, all these, we know the only really, I think, wild card right now would be the property tax, but I'm still pretty moderately comfortable that that's going to come through. So that's all I have there. And if there's nothing else, I'll move on.
Move on. 2021.
Okay,
July 1.
So here's something else. I don't want to, time is 7:53. I do want to make sure that we all kind of have a common understanding of what the state, wrong title, but the topics are the same. I mean, topics are different. So the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, in fact, is as part of the, they do a presentation and representation at the Ways and Means Committee meeting that occurs every year when the state is in fact coming up with their consensus revenue budget. And they have come out with a release that was back on April 14th that I believe gives us a perspective on how we need to be considering what terrain we're going to be facing, and give ourselves a reality check on really how difficult the next year or two is going to be. I think we can manage our way through it, but we will need to adapt and change along the way, more so than I think any municipality in the state has been required to do. And of course, we don't know what the federal government's going to do. There's all kinds of funding floating around for cities and towns, and we still haven't, flushed all that out. That could help us a great deal, and we don't know if there's going to be another round of funding put into the economy, whether there'll be a third funding and a fourth funding. We don't know any of that. So they talked about that in their news release back on April 14th. And then I'm going to go through some just scenarios just to give some guideposts, some signposts of, hey, what if we had our best case? And what if it was somewhere in the middle towards worst case, moderately bad? And again, it's not so much that these numbers are etched in stone, but it gives the severity of what may happen, which allows us to think, us being collectively think about, what does funding and operation budget look like in 2021, late 21, because I think that's when we're really going to feel the impacts of this, the economic issues, mid to late. At least I think it's going to be delayed more than folks think, but that's just my opinion there. And then what it looks like into the subsequent years. So here's the consensus budget was $31,151 million at the state level. It's interesting to note that only $26.9 billion of that actually goes to the state's operating budget. They have their own mechanisms of revenue projections that go to three different funding buckets. MBTA, School Building Assistance Fund, and Retirement and Pensions. So like us, when we do free cash and we allocate it, they actually allocate some of that up front. And there are mechanisms and minimum contributions that have to be made. So they started with $31,151 billion, and the new number is $26,756, or a reduction of 14.1%. I think the important thing to look at here, it's the sales tax. They're seeing sales tax down 20.2%. I'll get into it a little bit further, but that drives that's where our motor vehicle excise tax will show up for us, right? Because a big nut for them is in the revenue side is when someone buys a vehicle. And meals tax is also a big nut because that's part of goods or services, and that has been a growing part of the economy, not only for Bridgewater but for the state. So I bring your attention to that. So 14.1%, and this is where they gave the context. So certainly there's been really a shock to the sales tax supply revenue as a projecting forward. Buying taxable goods, meals, vehicles all remained been reduced mainly to online shopping. Loss of work, furloughs, reduced hours, financial difficulties, further discretionary spending. We all know people are going to be struggling with that, maybe less today, more, and that's why I referred to a delay, maybe more after July, at the end of July, if there's not additional round of supplements to unemployment or any other CARE Act benefits that will go directly to the taxpayer. And then eventually rents, mortgages, healthcare costs, student loans, and all those things are going to be put before our taxpayer, and they're going to have to start to make decisions. And then we all know in the reopening, social distancing is going to be a component, crowded spaces, and the way we all used to gather, or many of us gathered at our local water hole or out to dinner or sporting events and so forth. But we don't know how that's going to unfold over the next 6 to 9 to 12 to 24 months. All right. And in that also, people are going to have to be deciding what are they going to spend their money on, because there's going to be less to spend. So that's going to have an impact on all of that. There will be a pent up demand at some level once the restrictions, and now we're talking May 18th, as the restrictions potentially begin to lift. And as the governor said today, slowly, methodically, not all at once and in a planned way. The biggest thing that I don't think anyone knows, because no one's around that I can talk to that was here in the Great Depression, is what's the psychological impact? How is that going to affect individual spending? Because any dollar spent in some ways comes back to the cities or town. Maybe not in the amount or percentages that you would like, but every dollar spent in the Commonwealth comes back to the cities and towns. So we need to take that into consideration. And we also don't know what the layoffs and what that's going to be. We know what it is short term, and we know how that's being shored up by revenue. But this forecast assumes that the policies lead to peak in a new virus in April. So this forecast deals with April as when things peak, and by June things start to subside. You have that downward trend in the number of coronavirus cases, and that sometime back in July, early July, there's some normalcy. Whatever that normalcy is, we don't know. The current jobs that were lost during this, well, I just pulled up the number recently, and I believe that's pretty close to where we're at right now. The last reporting. Someone, if you have a different number, please correct me, but I believe we're getting pretty close to that number in the Commonwealth. So how long will the COVID pandemic last? We don't know. Does the Massachusetts recovery lead or lag the US? Will the 2.2 plus trillion plus additional packages suffice? Will our taxpayers be able to take advantage of deferring mortgages payments, deferring rent payments? All those things are going to come into play here. And it just means we're going to have to be even more diligent in understanding what's happening in our local economy. And can the Federal Reserve prevent a second financial crisis? That's something that I won't even touch on today, but that's something, because I think what we can agree on is most individuals that listen to the news, the business news, Bloomberg, or any of their financial shows, that this is really a health crisis. And if we can get through the health crisis, we believe the economy will recover. And if it's really the length of the recovery that could turn it into a financial crisis, because that's what 2008 and 2009 was. It was a financial crisis. All right, so I'm going to go through this quickly so I can get to the numbers so you can see the context. But again, their assumption of the 14.1%, which drives all the numbers I have, looks towards some sort of reopening in July. That's bullet one. And if it can be achieved, then we could start to see some turnaround in the recovery. Like I alluded to in July, it's referred to more of a V-shaped. And so sometime in Q1 of FY21, there's that pent up demand. We could see some revenue on that, and then we could move and step into a recovery, whatever that recovery would look like under the new way of operating. All right, so we all listen to this, and we've heard our governor, and I don't think anyone in our state will really argue this, because he's our leader, and I happen to agree with his conservative approach. Maybe some do, others don't, but I think most do. The consumers have to feel safe in crowded settings, right? And any level of that's commensurate with the pre-crisis behavior, that has to be in place. and the talks of virus, the talks of testing, the talks of tracing, all those things, for us to feel confident, I think as taxpayers, residents, part of this Commonwealth, they have to be in place, and we have to feel that our leadership is doing a solid job with that. So in the shorter term, social distancing policies will be, and the testing of those positive cases are going to be really critical, and they're going to drive whether or not we open or reopen or don't. So we're not only measuring financial indicators, we have to measure behavioral indicators, which play themselves out in financial transactions, but also the way that the governor rolls out this opening over the next several months. So I'm not going to go into the less optimistic scenario. It comes back in the fall. That is, we open up and then we have to slow down because the opening up is causing a spike that the governor and his health experts don't feel we can tolerate, and we go back into a shutdown again. I think we need to just adapt to those changing events and be really clear on how the behaviors and the spending and the paying behaviors are manifesting themselves as we move forward. So this is a huge petri dish and a huge test tube for human behavior and how we're going to get out of this health-wise and economically. There's a big difference between a V-shaped and a U-shaped. All it means is time. So the blue line is, hey, if we're able to get back open, this is what they think can happen. They refer on this document Q3, which is in fact a calendar year on this particular document, which would be our Q1 for fiscal year. And so you can see the gap in millions of impact on the economy dependent upon whether or not we can reopen and start things going in that July timeframe. So we're going to be watching this. We're going to be watching the actual data coming from MTF and from other agencies. MTF reconciles their forecasting and all their modeling with Moody's. And so this has for us 2 points of reference there. And then of course the consensus from the Ways and Means Committee, what they adopt is in some cases more conservative or less conservative. So when the governor starts to come out with their numbers, we'll know that they will have at least 3 points of reference in developing their the impact that this is all going to have on their ability to distribute monies to cities and towns. All right. I'm going to move through these pieces and just get to really what we need to be monitoring. So property taxes account for 84 to 86% of our annual revenue. The new growth for FY21 calculation has been completed. All right. The total is 815,000 less 110,000 for the diff. The net is what the net is. Tim, you can calculate that in your head, I'm sure. But around $700,000, 710. The new growth for FY22, we're going to start to watch that now.
Tony, can we just back up for a sec?
Yes,
and
sir.
Just talk about the new growth versus the diff. The
Yes.
diff is all going back into Elm Street. That's not even available for us to appropriate other than to plow it right back into Elm Street, right?
Correct. So what was, when the diff is a district incentive financing was set up for the Elm Street, it was set up because one of the funding mechanisms to get that work done on that road, the major work that was required, which would attract businesses to come there. And in fact, it was a leading requirement for a number of businesses to even consider going there. So that was the funding source to pay the debt service on the portion of the bond that won't be paid for by our state grant. Okay, so the project is 7.7 million roughly, and let's say 3.3 million. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. 3 million to 3.3 is from the grant, and the remaining portion is going to be bonded by the town, and the principal and interest payments on that will be paid from the revenue that gets moved from the new growth. So the diff new growth component goes into that fund and is used to pay the debt service on that bond. So the net benefit to the town's new growth for operating budget is $710,000. Now, once that bond's all paid off, then that revenue reverts to the general fund. So a number of years from now, there will be a windfall of whatever the revenue being generated by that diff is. So if it's generating $500,000 worth of revenue, once the bond principal and interest is paid, that $500,000 would then become available for the general fund for its operating budget.
Hey, Tony,
Yes, sir.
is there any scenario where we could actually generate more than the bond, the debt service?
In any given year?
Yes.
Yeah, if for instance, I saw that we were generating $150,000 more, Sean, then I believe we have the mechanism to say we don't need to fund that fund fully from the diff. Again, I would probably, conservative, say we need to build up a reserve of X, and then we could start to, so there's two ways you do it. We can take it off the top as we go, or we can just pay down the bond or have the money in the fund to pay down the bond principal and interest. And then, in fact, we could then move that money back to the general fund in a shorter time frame. So
what you're saying, just so I'm clear. So basically there's three options. One, we could put that excess towards the debt service and pay down the bond quicker, right?
If we were allowed under the bond agreement, yes.
So are we allowed under the bond agreement?
We haven't bonded it yet. We're working with
Okay.
bond counsel and our financial advisor on that right now.
Okay, so thank you. The second one would be excess being put in some sort of reserve.
Yeah, so if we got 500,000 and the first year's bond interest payment was 190, that stays in that fund. It's referred to as a sinking fund. And in fact, what it will do is it will build the reserves necessary to meet the financial obligation. Once the financial obligation is met, whether it, because you have in revenue coming in the current year plus any reserves, then once that obligation is met, then in fact we go back to that diff and we can dissolve the diff, and in fact then that money goes to the general fund.
All right, so if the bond becomes defeased, then we can start realizing the revenue.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So what the assessing office and myself have been talking about is how do we begin to know 3 months from now what we have potential, what we have through analyzing the following things, what we have for potential new growth for FY22. First of all, if something goes before the planning board, the CED committee and the building department and Kim will notify us of any new plans or any potential projects that has some sort of merit that we want to put on our radar so that we can watch. In past years, past lives, when a permit showed up, that's when we would say, oh, by the way, there's something we need to pick up for new growth. So we're looking on the horizon better with that. Our assessor is going to immediately look at the uncompleted projects, houses that were half done, developments that were half done, but they stopped because of the COVID. We're going to do an outreach. We're going to talk to them, and we're going to look at the likelihood of 6 homes that are halfway done getting completed in this coming year, which would flow to FY22's new growth, is high. So we would put that in a high degree of certainty. Also, there are splits and subdivisions where land is then split or subdivisions are created and the valuation changes from one parcel to many parcels. And she's going to begin to look at that and make sure she's got that on her radar. Any new construction, she will be doing estimated calculations based on permit requests. And then on the personal property tax, 5 personal property tax vendors account for 95% of our personal property tax revenue. So we're going to watch those accounts closely. So that's what we can do on the.
Sorry, Tony, it's Bill. How many accounts account for 95%?
On the personal, 5.
Yeah. 5? Okay, thanks.
and they are all utility type companies. So the state aid accounts for about 8% of our local revenue, and certainly much more for the school district. So the Chapter 70 and the unrestricted local aid, we're going to have to rely on the governor's projection and to look at the forecasting that they're putting together. I think we're going to require more leadership from them in looking forward. And one of the big fundamental questions will be, what will they use from their rainy day fund to help augment the shortfalls that they are going to see as a result of COVID?
Yeah,
So-
but Tony, don't they usually pretty much use up E&D every year to fund what they need? And it's kind of like a
No.
chasing your tail thing? No?
Nope, not
Okay.
the state. They've become, since Governor Baker's come on, two things have happened. One, the budget comes out earlier. The budget's more predictable for local aid. Yes, the economy has in fact allowed that to happen, but they have mechanisms, as I described earlier, of revenue that goes into what the important buckets: school building, retirement, and MBTA. And then they have certain triggers that move money into their stabilization fund or rainy days. It's called the Commonwealth Stabilization Fund. And so they have mechanisms that move money at certain levels on some of their revenue streams. For instance, capital gains revenue, there's a trigger that puts X percent of that, or over X dollars. Forgive me for not having the exact mechanism, but there is a mechanism that puts that into a portion of that into the rainy day fund. So they have really done a much better job, and it's across the Commonwealth. Cities and towns have reserves across the board, more so than they ever have, and so does the state. I think that the highest rainy day fund they've ever had in dollars. So on the monitoring local receipts, 9% of the local revenue comes from 4 major categories, which represents 88 to 90% of the local receipts. So what are we going to pay attention? We're going to pay attention to these 4: motor vehicle, meals, rooms, and tax, penalties, interest on taxes, and licenses and permits. Any question on that other slide other 2 or 3 before I move to some of the numbers?
No.
Thank you. So we're calling it best case, and this is extrapolating from the MTF's best case. Okay. So for instance, our FY20 projected budget, and that's how we're going to compare things. And I call it projected. It was our adopted budget. Those were the revenues, and I've stripped down these revenues so that they're apples to apples. So I don't include debt exclusion, because that number just gets added to tax, and we don't spend that on anything but for debt. So I've stripped down some of these numbers to make it a very clean apples to apples comparison. So because of our new growth and our 2.5%, we're picking up 4.33% in our 84% bucket when we started to do our 2021 calculation. So that number, under any of the scenarios that I present, will not change. That's adjusted for the DIF revenue. So our new growth revenue does not include DIF revenue in there, the DIF component, I should say.
So Tony, can I just be really simple and stupid here?
No.
Yes, I can. With the year over year, we'd go up 2.5 on that number.
Right.
And so we're really getting an additional 1.8 from other new growth, right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
On the state receipts, I'm looking back to last year and I'm saying, okay, if they're going to see a 14.1% reduction, and if you strip away those monies that are earmarked and you just look at the budgeting revenue, they're really looking at a 15% revenue estimate adjustment for FY21. I think best case, we see a 2.6% decrease in our FY20 projected budget. we can argue whether it's 2.6 or it's 0 or, but you can see we're talking $117,000 reduction in the revenue.
And Tony, just to put a fine point on it, it would be not good fiscal practice to assume anything more than level funded, would it?
That's correct. And that's why I'm going 2.6 below last year.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm just thinking out loud. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Tony's bill. So as I recall, the past several years on state receipts, we've always seen a slight increase year over year, but you're predicting a minus 2.6 over last year. Is that correct?
Correct. And the governor's was 2.8. His initial budget scenario was a 2.8% increase. So if you put those together, you're talking for 5.4 change from his original budget proposal. Make sense?
So yeah, but the governor's budget for fiscal 21, there was an increase over fiscal 20.
That's correct. 2.8.
So you think that the state isn't going to level, your projection is the state won't level fund what we got for fiscal 20, that at some point they're going to cut 2.6% from what we received in fiscal 20, not from what the governor proposed.
Yeah, and what we'll watch on this is we got to watch. He's got to come back and say how much of the rainy day fund will they use to shore up the revenue shortfall. Again, the best case scenario that they're being given at Ways Means is a 15% reduction in revenue estimates for FY21. Now, if they adopt anything close to that, when they go back and create a new consensus revenue budget, which I assume that's what they would do, then they have to take that into account.
Yeah. Right. And I think they will use some of it. I don't think they're going to use it all, but they'll make up for some of that. But they also know, as you said, they know that all the towns are sitting on a bunch of cash too. And they're going to say, hey, look, we're going to help you out, but you're going to have to use some of your reserves to get through this year anyway. And then it's a decision here at the town level how much we want to use and how many of the services we want to protect as much as possible. So, yes. But I don't think, well, I mean, it's the 2.6% might be larger than that if you take a look at what the governor proposed in House 1. It could be more like 4% based on what he proposed.
Right. So I'm going to give you 3 cases. This is the best. Let's say this is best case. And again, this is just a stake in the ground so that we can start to think about what that would mean. So it could be level funded. It could be 2.6. It could be 2.9. But probably the decisions that we're going to be faced with when we start to put that stake in the ground have some scope of effect and impact. And then when I move you to another number, they're going to have another scope of effect and impact. And then when you go to a third number, you have another scope of effect and impact. And that's how the modeling Michael and I and Kimberly and Jen have talked about using to put those stakes in the ground, because then we can go inside the numbers and measure where we're heading towards those numbers. And then we will be able to adapt, whether it be adapting May 19th or adapting August 15th. We're going to need to be monitoring ourselves and adapting to the circumstances. That's going to be a key to how we manage through this. So what you'll get is down below, and I won't get into the detail, but that's how it breaks down. So in essence, it's a Chapter 70 reduction of 2.5, because some of the other numbers in the state receipts muddle the 2.6%. And they're not all that relevant. So I pulled them out for Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government and used a flat 2.5. Then we use motor vehicle at 10% below 20, 50% on meals, 10% on principal penalties and interest, and 25% on licenses and permits. So you can see how those are the numbers that are really driving our state and our local receipts. I've already given you the scenario on property taxes, and that plays out under the three cases that I'm presenting. So that's best case. All right, this is a more moderate impact. So you can see the property tax number doesn't change. Now we're looking at a 4.8% reduction in state receipts, a 17% in local receipts. Then you can see how the Chapter 70 unrestricted in this scenario breaks down 5 and 5. Motor vehicle goes to 15, meals go to 60. P&I think stays, if I can go back, that stays around 10, and licenses and permits go up to 30. And then you go to worst case, and you get a 9.3% reduction in state receipts, 21.7% reduction in local receipts, and then it plays across 10, 10, 20%, 70%, 10%, and 35%. So what would that mean bottom line? I don't have that on a slide. I do have the numbers based on, and again, I'm not publishing this yet because we're not in a place to publish, so I'll give you rough numbers, what that looks like right now. So rough numbers, and this was based on the budget guidelines that the town manager put in his original budget that he presented on February 1. What's different about that number is we were able to catch up with all the work we needed to do. We had a number of contracts that got settled, all right, in 20 that were impacting all our 20 budgeted numbers, and also were impacting our 21 budget projection numbers. So if you were to go back to that document that was issued to council and published, you'll know that there's some differences. Well, that's one of them. The other one is we didn't have the increase to health insurance yet. We were using a more conservative number. The number was lower. It's at 2% now. I think we were around 6 to 8%. We were using a more more optimistic number on our retirement. We anticipate our retirement assessment not going up as it did the last time we went through our assessment process for the first year. We thought it would actually drop or be at the same level, which we had used in our original numbers, but that went up to over 8%. So that had to be adjusted. The school's at 2.92%. That's the original percentage of revenue sharing that was in the town manager's February 1 preliminary budget numbers. With those caveats, we're looking at about a $700,000 shortfall in our projections based on the best case scenario. When we go to the moderate case, we're looking at about 1.7. And then we go to the worst case and we're looking at 2,000,002.
So, Tony, can you walk through? I'd like to walk through the worst case,
yep.
The 2.2, because I'm thinking, all right, our revenue's going up 0.6%. We need to get to a 3% increase to fund what we typically do. I'm talking big round numbers here, not for publication, as you say.
Understood.
So we need to multiply that increase by 5. So why isn't it closer to like 1.5, 1.7? Why is it closer to 2.2?
You got me.
Okay. No, I mean, I didn't expect you to have an answer right away because no one, I mean, I didn't see this in advance and I didn't prepare you for the question. But basically what I'm looking at and saying, okay, well, 3% of, 54 is 150, 1.5 plus another, 120. So call it 1.5 million. I'm wondering where the difference comes from. That's all. So if we can catch up on that afterwards, in the next couple days, that would be great.
Yeah, I think some of it is the rounding that I'm doing on these estimates.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, we're talking big round air math numbers at this point, but.
Correct. Yeah, will do. Thank you.
So is it possible, are we going to get a budget at the council level on our May 18th meeting? I think that's what the projection is, that we'll get a budget May 18th. And then refer it out to the committees. Is that still on target, or you don't know? Or
I think what we will have is a budget. I think we have the documents ready to go to Michael, and we can start to do all the reconciling like Tim was talking about, making sure things cross and high level numbers tie to the lower level numbers. And I think that's going to be a starting point. The town manager is planning on budget meetings with all the department heads starting tomorrow. So we will have a one-on-one budget meeting with the department head for every single operation. And we will be reviewing this information as well as their operating budget. So that's going to be done over the next 2 days.
right, and does anybody hear anything about what's happening on Beacon Hill? And, are they moving forward with doing what they normally do to the House 1 budget, or,
I'm going to.
I don't know. I don't hear anything. It's
right.
It's like, I know they've allowed this possibility of a 1/10 type of process, which would be a nightmare. But, is the state going to have a budget in time, and are they going to finalize all our local numbers? If we're going to, in your worst case scenario, if we lose 9.3% in state receipts, you would think that the Chapter 70 money is going to get cut just as bad, you would think.
Correct.
And that's just another problem for us, too. Yeah.
So we have seen new legislation at the State House for many things that our first time. So in my mind's eye, if I was up there, part of the discussion, my thought process would be, this is unprecedented. So what new mechanism, what new vehicles can we put in place that can help us get through this health crisis? The problem is when the health crisis becomes an economic crisis, then we're talking a long-term impact.
We do a month-to-month budget. We do a month-to-month budget starting July 1. That's very good.
Is that allowable with the regional school district?
I don't know about that.
Well, here's the thing. Whether we have a 12-month budget or a month-to-month budget, we're going to be managing our budget month to month. I know the town manager's intention is to do that. We feel that we're disciplined enough now, and we're seeing it now. All he had to do was say, we need to look at our expenses. There should be no non-discretionary, and we haven't seen an item come through that you would consider non-discretionary.
Right.
We're doing budget estimates every week in police and fire.
Right.
Every single week. So that's going to be our normal way of operating going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. But if we want to have a balanced budget based on the needs and revenues by June 30th, then what we're going to have to do on the council level is really decide how much reserves we want to apply towards the budget.
And I think the town manager is, and I want to speak for him. I know he's on the call, so I'll let him jump in. But I know we've talked about this, and he understands. He understands that that's going to have to be a component of it, and that's what the next week's worth of work is going to be.
Okay, can I acknowledge Mike Dolan? He has a answer on the 1/12 budget situation. Go ahead, Mike.
Good evening, folks. Thanks for the opportunity, Dennis.
Yep.
So the district has to, if we don't certify a budget by June 1st, we have to operate on a 1/12 budget. We are moving forward on that state law. As of right now, we are thinking we will not have a budget by then because Rainham town meeting is after June 1st when they would certify their budget. So we are starting the process, the conversations of going that route. So that's, I hope that answers the question. But that is where we're looking, and I, as a editorial, I hope that the school district is part of those budget meetings as well that will happen with each department. Again,
Mike, Tim here. And I hope I can ask a clarifying question, Dennis.
Yeah.
Okay. That's 1/12 of your previous year's budget each month, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
So I was going to ask that question of what does this, like, I know we got that memo from the school school district. I think what they approved was bigger than even what before the COVID-19 started. What they were asking for us was more than what we had recommended for a percentage increase. So where do we stand on that, and how does that all play out?
I think that's a Michael Dutton question.
So, yeah, I'll chime in here a little bit. That's correct. I mean, that's, I think we all acknowledge, we had a conversation with superintendent the end of last week, and I think we all acknowledge that, we've got, both of us have a long way to go before we even have any inkling of how our budgets are going to flesh out. And it all sort of stems from this notion that, the revenue side right across the state and in every city and town is just a completely different nebulous concept at this point. So, when we talk about a balanced budget, we mean, we've done revenue calculations that will withstand the DOR's scrutiny, and we have matched the expenses that the town council is going to vote against those revenue estimates, and they're balanced. So I think at this point, it's Tony laid out 3 different scenarios, best case, medium case, worst case. I don't think anybody at the state level, well, certainly nobody at the state level, certainly nobody at the local level can tell us whether those are going to be accurate estimates at this point or not. So I think Tony's point about, we look, right now every week at a couple of our departments, but certainly every month as we move forward, we'll be looking at, how the budget that the council actually voted, how those expenses are lining up with the revenues that we have actually, I won't even say decided, but the revenues we've identified throughout the fiscal year. So, we'll do our best to figure out what those revenues are going to look like. We're obviously going to do our best then to match the expenses against those revenues, and try to provide the same services that we've been providing, for the last fiscal year. So, so everybody's part, in response to Mike, Mike Dolan, everybody's part of those discussions, and we'll include Rainham. We'll hopefully include representatives of FinCom and Budget and Finance. I think this is one of those areas where, and I've explained this, to the leadership team. This is one of those rare instances where the budget ultimately I'm going to have to make some decisions about how we balance. I use that term loosely because what is balance, but how we balance that budget and situate and position the town so that we're not coming back, you know, in January or in March saying, you know what, we don't meet the revenue, so we're going to have to do additional cuts, you know, mid-year cuts on our own. I don't want to be in that position. So, but I think, you know, to Mike's point, it's a conversation that all of us are going to have, and it's going to inform whatever I can bring to the council. Which honestly, at that May date, we won't really know. Tony won't have a really good gauge on revenue collection from real estate and water and sewer, which is one of the, you know, several of the areas that we're really tracking. But I think at that May meeting, you know, it'll be a first reading, it'll get referred out, and the process will start. And during the course of that process, we'll be able to, you know, see how our revenues are tracking and what, you know, whether or not based on that we're going to have to make any adjustments to the budget that's presented at first reading.
Well, Mike, based on what I'm hearing tonight, there is no way that we can meet our budget expenses with the revenue forecast that he's predicting so what we need to think about as a town, as management, is that how much do we want to cut, if anything, and how much reserves of our reserves do we want to use? That's really because we know the state. I don't know what the state's going to do. You know, they're going to make us use some of our reserves or cut. So they're going to use some of their reserves to give us, to hopefully hold to what they told us they were going to give us in the House 1 budget. I don't know how far they're going to get there, but 14% revenue loss for them is huge, and it's certainly going to roll down to the towns. So the correct question is we know the revenue is not going to be there to meet the budget that we expect to level services without making any cuts. So the question is how much of our reserves do we want to use on a one-time basis to get through fiscal 21 in the hopes that there's a quicker recovery during fiscal 21 so we don't have to use those any more reserves against. You can't keep doing that. You can't keep doing that because that gets you into trouble.
Yep. No, I agree. I think you encapsulated that pretty well.
So Dennis,
yeah.
So quick question on that. So one of the challenges here, I think that Tony and everyone is going to have is if there is, you know, a downturn and then a recovery, how long is that recovery? Because we need to understand a projection based on like the 2008 numbers about how often we need to, you know, look at the slope of that line that we're increasing each year and where the funding for that line comes from, whether it's part of state, local, and stabilization, and meet that out, because it'd be difficult and challenging if we did, you know, first 2 years expecting a rebound in the third year and not see it. Then we're really devastated.
It's a great point, because we have been talking about a slowdown prior to this COVID-19. We have been talking about, you know, motor vehicle excise, and you know, things are coming to an even keel here, that we're not going to see the types of increases in these receipts that we've seen in the past. So we've been thinking about those things, and now this, you know, pandemic hits, which is compounds things. Yeah, we'll come out of the pandemic, but what are we going to be left with? And are we naturally going to be in the slower economy anyway, even if we didn't have the pandemic? So it compounds things, which makes it very, very difficult for the financial team to come up with a number like we're normally used to by this time or in June. It's you know, that's why I think you're right. We may need to make adjustments as we go along. So we'll see.
Dennis, one more question, if I could. to Tony. Tony, are you also tracking like housing stock? Because I've been looking at that for years. So the number of houses that have gone into open space, the build out off of Cherry Street, the two complexes there, Pratt Town is underway, and some others have consumed a lot of buildable land that has generated a lot of new growth, but may slow down in the future. Have you been able to track anything of that?
No, we haven't gotten to that point where we could say, we've talked about it theoretically in our leadership team, is wouldn't it be nice if we knew what inventory we had? But some of that land doesn't become inventory until someone does something to it. You know what I mean? It can be valued one way or valued another, and turning it into new growth is what you're really talking about. What's potential inventory? No, we haven't. Not that we shouldn't consider it.
So to continue with these joint meetings, I don't know Bill, are you the president? I don't know who's the chairman.
No, Eric is.
Eric is.
Eric's the chairman. I know Monday nights you guys seem to be busy because you're on a lot of you have a role on the building committee. And they're going to meet pretty frequently. So we'd like to continue with the joint meetings. Obviously, we don't want to have these before a council meeting. So I'm thinking of having these joint meetings on the off council nights. Is that a Tuesday night when the council isn't meeting? Is that good for you guys? Or do Mondays work periodically or not? I don't know. Whatever's good for you. This was, we wanted to do this meeting last, on a Monday night, but we couldn't because of the school building committee. So
Yeah, Dennis, I think, and I'll ask Josh to poll the group, but
okay.
I think with what's going on, Tuesdays could be something that we could take a look at.
Okay.
I'll get with Josh. I'll ask him to reach out to the team, and I'll circle back with you, Dennis.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis.
Yeah.
It's Tim, if I could. I think it's vital that we have joint meetings with the finance committee because they obviously create great insight for us. But I also think as a committee of the town council, we should try to meet on the Mondays of town council meetings just to talk about what we're thinking about and get more information. I don't want to wait every other week to have these updates. So everyone's certainly welcome to join in, but I'd prefer to meet every week. Monday's just us, every other Tuesday joint.
No, I agree. Every other meeting, every other week would be the joint. We will certainly have a weekly meeting. If there's not a lot to update, we could meet before the council meeting. But if there's, once we get the budget to us, then Mondays are fine. I'm fine with that, Tim, absolutely. Yep. Every week. Every week.
COVID time, what else do you have to do?
Anything else?
No.
And keep your ears on the legislature. They're the key here, really.
Then I'll make a motion to adjourn the Budget and Finance Committee.
Second.
The motion is a second. Tim?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Dennis, yes. We are adjourned at 8:47.
I have a motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting for tonight.
Second, Nate.
We need a motion.
I need a first, Nate. Sorry.
A first motion.
Do I have a
Second, Julie.
Okay, I'll do the roll call vote. Eric?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Nate?
Yes.
Susie? I got that meter, hold on. Susie?
When is our next meeting? Am I allowed to ask that?
Sorry about that. Yes.
Thank you. And as far as the next meeting goes, right now I have on my calendar, I believe it's May 11th.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Is that that's a 6:30, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it'll be at 6:30.
We're doing it right. Monday is 6:30, the 11th.
Yep.
Yep.
And then I'll touch base with Eric and we'll see about the joint meetings as well.
Perfect. Thanks,
All
Josh.
right.
Yep. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.